Good evening, Patriots. What a pleasure it is to be with you here again on this platform. I had been suspended off of YouTube for about a week. I want to alert you right away that what you can do is find me on Rumble. And of course, a lot of people have gone over to Rumble. I am looking at Patreon and a couple other places to land and to be a little more pervasive on my feed to you. So that way there's really no interruption. This was a great learning experience for me as I had to learn a little bit more about how things work. And one of the biggest things I learned was that it is really important at this time to be ready to leave, to be ready to move, and to be ready to change from where you are to somewhere else. The most important thing we can do at this juncture and at this time is to tell the truth and to get as much of that out there and reflected as possible. This is always the focal point, but I feel that this is a particularly pertinent time to especially look ahead at where you could be next instead of how it should play out in fairness and in balance and also in the ways that are just human decency. This is one of the things that I've really had to revisit this week was the protection of my work and the self-protection of who I am and what I'm doing. I say this also because it is the responsible thing to do with everything that we've been given and all of the ways that we are privileged to serve. The name of our piece tonight is Catch and Release. A couple of years ago, I did a series called The Fall Guy. At that time, it was something that I felt was very indicative of the way that we are perceived in the world and the way that we ultimately perceive ourselves. There were some things going on in my personal life that I could see the pattern of how I had subsisted in areas of serving my family, my community, and myself. Now, when I say community, what I really mean is the environments that I found myself in. In those moments at that time in my life, which actually, thinking back, was probably about 3.5 years ago, I had come to a very interesting impasse. I saw that perhaps there wasn't a way for me to communicate at that time exactly what I wanted in community. And so what I did was I just kind of decided that perhaps there wasn't a community for me and that the best I could hope for was to serve as if there were a community somewhere for me. And perhaps if I just kept looking and doing, that either someone would notice or I would somehow deserve or earn my place. This was quite frustrating because we do not need to earn or deserve our place in this world. If there is ever any evidence that is called for to prove that we deserve to be here, it's that we're here. And sadly, and I think even more irritatingly, what I perceived as a task that was enormous at hand to figure what I considered to be a problem out about finding the community that I could subsist in. What I discovered, at least to some degree, and more deeply as of late, is that the two or more that are gathered are actually ourselves and God. Now, I'm not going to get all religious because I'm not religious, and I actually more and more have this very strange dislike and uncomfortability with religion in general, at least the way that it has been administered and designed up to this point. So I hope you understand that I am not talking about a church. I am not talking about an ideology or a pastor or an imam or whatever. I am actually talking about the connection between ourselves and God. And the only middleman that is needed is Jesus Christ. This thought or idea that we need anything else is false. While we may enjoy going to church, while we may enjoy having fellowship and speaking with each other about the writings and the scriptures and doing it at what we call a house of worship, this is indeed an extra. because the real foundation is the relationship that we have with God. When Jesus said that no one can approach the Father but through me, he didn't say no one can approach the Father but through me and Hollywood actors and Scientology, or an imam and a mosque, or a rabbi and a synagogue. He said no one can approach the Father but through me. I find this to be not just a salient point, but a critically foundational spiritual law that without which nothing is possible. And the reason I say this is because everything that had come to pass when Jesus came, when he lived his life, when he gave us all of his teachings and his wisdom, and when he became the perfect answer for all of our prayers, and the perfect Lamb of God whose blood paid for all of our salvation, it is actually kind of repulsive to me to think that anything else could be placed between not just us and God, except for Jesus, but between us and Jesus Christ. This choice of our erroneous thoughts and beliefs of inadequacy and insecurity are not benign. They lead to things that are far more pervasive and much deeper complications of how we will and do relate to ourselves and each other. In a conversation with one of my friends, we were talking about the idea of actually falling, and that these words, fall, falling, fell, what is felt with them is the oldest part of our brain remembering when we were living in caves, in cliffs, in trees, wherever there was that we could get away from being the prey of some predator that was much physically stronger than us and perhaps awake at different hours than we were. One of the oldest traumas suffered by humanity is falling. To this day, there have been scientific studies that have substantiated that even babies who can't even crawl yet are afraid of falling. And thus, this is something that has been genetically hardwired into us, this precursor and warning of what could be our demise if we aren't careful with our balance. We talked about the word fall, and some of the things that came up were falling in love, falling for something, falling out. All of these imply that there is some amount of loss of control, if not the internal mechanism that's triggered that seems as though it is a total loss of control that creates the situation of falling. Even when we use the word fell, oh, I can't believe I fell for that. Well, I guess he fell for it again. If I fell into wrong hands, I'm so glad that what you stood for has never been felled. The idea that intimacy and love can be equated with falling, which is a very dangerous thing. And in fact, I've heard people use the term falling in and out of love. There's a song by the Human Prairie League called Amy, and he actually says that in there, falling in and out of love with you, trying to determine whether or not to stay in a situation. And I think it's interesting that we use these terms of danger to express that which we have an emotion around and a circumstance that everyone yearns for, perhaps in part to experience that very lack of control that has actually terrified humanity for so long. In a sense, there's a little bit of kind of an inherent built-in excuse with it as well. Well, I couldn't help it. It's how I felt. And in fact, there are also other words that come into play about falling, felling, fault, and fallen, such as catch. This is also a little bit of vocabulary that can be bent back and forth for different reasons. I really don't know why I felt that way. I guess I was just really caught up in it. This sounds really good, but what's the catch? I was just trying to catch her attention. All those words that were falling from my lips, I really hope you caught my meaning. In these ways, we talk about some of the deepest things that we will encounter between ourselves, and indeed, some of the very deepest things that we will encounter about ourselves. And what seems to repetitively stand out are these small degrees of separation from that which we know deep down is what we feel and what we pick up on or energetically tune into as a frequency in the bandwidth of our connected humanity. As Jesus had come to be the example, the perfect example of a human being, that we could see God's laws come through to direct the human that he was, what we find in every single instance is that there was no victimization or self-victimization around anything that he did while in this world. Even down to his arrest and his imminent death, he reminded Peter, who sliced off the ear of a soldier nearby in defense of his Lord, that he could be rescued in that moment, swept away from the ugliness, the darkness, and the imperfections that he was operating within, if he chose to do so. And indeed, the evidence that he was not self-victimizing was that his choice to carry out his mission and his purpose was never laced with regret or complaint or the need for validation from the established order and those in religious places. In fact, what a byproduct and symptom of the truth turned out to be in that particular arena were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and those in higher places, so to speak, being exposed for what they really were in those situations, and their usury of the people and the human personal sovereignty of everyone involved, which not only made a marketplace of the synagogue, and as Jesus put it, his Father's house, but a marketplace of souls and people themselves. We talk a lot about human trafficking and the ideas around prisoners of poverty and hunger. And sometimes there is little recognition for the spiritual communism that has been foisted upon those who are looking to be closer to God through the means of eliminating the true divine provision of entrance to the Father and an attempt to replace it with a facade that works to mask our natural curiosity and direction toward our Father. While human trafficking is an abomination and offense to our very core, what I find disturbing is the trafficking of people, not just in their physical sense, but in their spiritual denigration, and the attempt to reduce them to the point where there is a doubt about the worthiness of their own presence here on this planet. At times we forget that the major religions were the government at one time, and some religions still are. And so is it really any wonder that people have a stigma, perhaps not as deep as the fear of falling, but one that has been made more grotesque as it has been manufactured by the very people that claim to be the holders of the tickets to the stairway to heaven? I find that in myself, there are moments and moments and moments now that seem to be quicker and quicker, that I still discover pieces of myself that have been either obscured or perhaps sectioned off, so that it appears that there are gaps and that perhaps I was missing something, when in fact I missed nothing at all. And as I work to sort of suss out these pieces that I have been obscured from the experience of them, what I'm also discovering is the excitement of not the acquisition of something new, but the fulfillment of that which I had always suspected to be there, but had lived confused as it did not show up on my radar. I find much relief in knowing that as I endure the circulation coming back into these limbs that had produced so much phantom pain, that this isn't just a hope for me and some fantasy unrequited. This is the case for all humanity, that each of us now, as we were caught up in something, as we fell for things, as we were set up to do so, and as we are discovering how to reclaim our sovereignty, all with the understanding that we need no one else to help us, we are now at the availability of the opportunity more than ever to be thankful for the resources and for those we love around us as we stumble and as they so graciously catch our fall. We stand ready to do the same for those around us. At first, perhaps the sprint into Second Renaissance isn't really a sprint. It could be a stumbling, a falling, a regaining our balance, and standing again after we fell, And if we can know that all of us are going through this to some degree, and that these days of falling, of being caught up in things, and perhaps of even having nightmares of something trying to catch us, that this is the experience that reminds us of our humanity. We are not here to improve the human. We are here to unobstruct the experience of what it is to be a human and to actually be in the perfect design that we were so gifted with. And so one of the ways in which I am learning this for myself is not that there won't be a moment when something did catch me, or when I caught myself and caught myself up into something. What I know is that if someone like me, who perhaps could have never woken up, can recognize where those pieces of the fence to my spiritual immune system were broken down or at least bent, then I myself hold every single tool and key to repair that which was not set properly with a level that was balanced, and to build upon that which will be the genuine expression of my soul, and to not live in fear that I will stumble again, that I am not perfect, and that perhaps my foot will catch upon something and that I will stumble again, and that though I know that I need no one but God, I also know that I do not need to get rid of everyone but God, as everyone is an expression of God. And I do not need to spend my time trying to figure out how to trust certain individual people or situations, because assuredly I will stumble again. But for the love of God, I will be able to see what I stumbled on and how I might light the road for others, so that we may all not fear the catch, but live in the truth of the release.